When I was young, we used to play outside all the time. I rarely see children playing outside these days. Everyone would gather at my parents' house. There must have been 10 or 12 kids that would come. We would play softball, football, basketball, Red Rover, send somebody over. The girls would play jacks, the boys would play marbles. Every day, when the chimes of the church struck 12, we would run to the edge of the road, close to the road, and we would sit down. And we'd look up the hill. It was called Jake Odell Hill. We would look up the hill and we'd wait. And eventually, a basset hound would come over the hill. Big, fat basset hound, floppy ears. His name was Yogi. He'd come over the hill, and just behind Yogi was a man called Wilbur. He would walk down the hill, and when they got to where we were sitting on the bank, Yogi would just sit down. And Wilbur would look at us and he would say, "What do you all want?" And somebody in that group would say, "Wilbur, would you tell us a story?" And he would say, "I don't have time to tell you a story. I got to get up the road." But you know what? Every time he would tell us a story. Stories about everything. He was in the army. He was a prisoner of war. And he told us stories about that. He won a lot of medals. I know that because he brought them one day and he showed them to us. Wilbur was the West Virginia State Marble Shooting Champ. I know that because I saw the trophy. It was the state of West Virginia, and on the northern panhandle was a gold marble, on the eastern panhandle was a gold marble, down south gold marble, and to the west a gold marble. Wilbur would tell us stories about everything, and yes, he'd tell us stories about the Bible. He would tell us stories about Jesus, many stories about Jesus, and his love and his forgiveness, especially his love for those who were persecuted. Wilbur would finish and he'd say, "You all get out of here now," and we'd scatter. And Wilbur and Yogi would go on up the road. Now, everybody knew where Wilbur was going. Wilbur was going to the beer tavern. He would stay there all day and do what he did, and Yogi would wait on the outside. And when Wilbur started home, Yogi would lead him home. Now, we were told that it's okay to stop Wilbur as he was coming down the hill. But it wasn't okay to stop Wilbur as he was going home. Yogi led him home every day. 2 or 3 days we'd go to the road and the chimes would strike 12 and we'd run to the bank, and guess what? No Wilbur. That went on for 3 or 4 days. And then we just didn't see Wilbur anymore. Didn't see Wilbur, didn't see Yogi. About a week after that, my dad said, "I've got something to tell you." And he took me into the kitchen table and he set me down and he said, "You're not going to see Wilbur no more." Of course, I said, "Why?" And he said, "Wilbur's dead. He died." He said, "But they're going to have a service, a memorial service for Wilbur at the church. Me and your mom's going. You can go too if you want to." I thought, "Nah, I'm not going to do that." But you know, as the time drew near, I decided to go. Got in the car and we just drove maybe a mile. And we got to the church and I looked and I was looking for Yogi, but I didn't see Yogi. I did notice a lot of cars in the parking lot. Went into the church and walked in and stopped in the aisle and looked straight up the aisle. And I saw that big wooden casket. And I could see Wilbur's nose sticking out of the casket. Went up and stood there, and as I was standing there, I thought, well, Wilbur just looks like he's asleep. And just then this woman come up and was talking to my dad, and she said, you know, everybody loved Wilbur. Everybody loved Wilbur. But she said, it's a shame that he wasted his life. I've remembered that all my life. It's a shame he wasted his life. To me, Wilbur didn't waste his life. He had an effect on a lot of people, especially young people, and especially me. I've told that story for 30 years. Every church I've ever been in, I've told that story. We were having a preacher's meeting years ago, and it was a snowshoe. It was a weekend retreat, and they asked me to talk. And you know what I did? A bunch of preachers. And I stood up and I told that story of Wilbur. And as I was telling that near the end, I noticed people were drawing their face down and looking aggravated and looking mad. And after it was over, I asked a friend of mine, I said, what was wrong with him? And they said, well, you seem to be making Wilbur out as a saint. And they didn't like that. And of course, a week later, I got a call from my DS, my district superintendent. And he was talking about this, and he said, seems to me you tried to put Wilbur in heaven. And I remember exactly what I said. I said, are you trying to keep him out? That's the last I heard about that. Mary was the first one to witness the risen Christ. Remember what Jesus said to Mary. He said, go tell my disciples and Peter. Go tell my disciples and Peter. Separates Peter out and calls Peter by name. Now, who is this man, Peter? Well, he was a fisherman. And Jesus came upon him in the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus looked at him and said, follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men. And Peter follows. Peter's the one that said on the road to a village, Jesus said, who do they say the Son of Man is? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, upon this rock I will build my church. Peter was in the inner circle. He witnessed all the teachings of Jesus and all the miracles. Peter knew who Jesus was. On that night when they took Jesus, Peter followed from a distance. Jesus said he would be crucified and he would die. And Peter said, no. If that's so, I will die with you. And Jesus says, Peter, this very night, you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And so it was, Peter is following Jesus, and groups of people question him. You're the Galilean that was with Jesus. No, 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the rooster crowed. How did Peter feel? Peter was an outsider now in his mind. He had denied Jesus 3 times. Mary says, Jesus says to Mary, go and tell my disciples and Peter. It doesn't matter how many times we fall away from Christ. It doesn't matter if we deny him. maybe even betray him, he continuously calls out to us. Mary, tell my disciples, and Peter. Mary, tell my disciples, and Wilbur. Mary, tell my disciples, and Brent. The love and the grace of Jesus Christ is meant for all. No matter what you've done, no matter what you've said, the grace is available to you. And he waits for you. Amen.